Okay, so let's look at sponge filters. There's been a lot of talk and debate and stuff recently about sponge filters and their sponges. Is it better to have a coarse sponge or a fine sponge? And what I mean by that is the sponge itself, is it coarse material or is it fine material? And it's measured in pores per inch, or you may say it as PPI. So the lower the number, the less pores per inch of that sponge. It means the holes are bigger. The smaller, the bigger the number, the more holes per inch, or pores per inch. So the holes are smaller. So what's the point of a sponge filter first? What does it do? Well, there's three types of filtration. There's chemical, where you use chemicals to take stuff out of your water. So like charcoal, activated carbon, it will chemically pull other chemicals out of your water. Sponge filters don't typically do that at all. Mechanical filtration. Mechanical filtration is where you basically manually grab stuff out of the water. And so sponge filters do that some, but they're horrible at it. Coarse sponges or fine sponges, both are horrible. But they do it. The sponge catches things in your water and gets them out of the water column. Now with a sponge filter, it catches it and it holds it in the water column, but it's in the sponge. So it's not floating around, but it's still in your water. So we'll get back to that. The third type of filtration is biological filtration, and that's what sponge filters do, biological filtration. And that's where you grow bacteria that will consume ammonia and produce nitrite. You grow another type of bacteria that will consume nitrite and produce nitrate. So that's the first half of the nitrogen cycle. And we'll talk about that later. That's another video that I'm wanting to make. We all misunderstand the nitrogen cycle. But anyways, back on topic. So sponge filters are made to be biological filtration. They do some mechanical and zero chemical for the most part. There's some out there that are trying to do chemical filtration, and you can modify to do some chemical filtration, but that's another topic. So, which is better, the fine sponge or the coarse sponge for biological and mechanical filtration? Well, we've already looked at biological or mechanical filtration. Sponges just are horrible at it anyways. So if you're looking to do mechanical filtration, you'd be better to do something like a power filter, like a hang on the back, a canister, something that's actually going to suck the water out of the tank, or have it overflow out of the tank and get pumped back in after it's been cleaned. Something like that. But okay, so on a sponge filter, mechanical filtration is created by the sponge itself catching items out of the water and holding them in the sponge. So let's look at it kind of different. Let's look at a net. If you have a net with bigger holes, is it going to catch more, or is a net with smaller holes going to catch more? Same thing with a sponge. The smaller the holes in the sponge, the more stuff it's going to catch. So the fine sponge is going to do a better job at mechanical filtration. Alright, so let's go to the biological filtration, which is going to do better at biological filtration. So the way a sponge filter works for biological filtration, the bacteria needs surface area to grow on, and it needs water movement to grow. So your water movement is created by your bubbles, as you can see back here, coming up out of the sponge filter. The bubbles kind of create a vacuum behind them and pull water with them. So the water's pulled through the sponge and up the top of the sponge filter, usually through an uplift tube or an opening. So you get the water flow through there. The sponge itself creates a surface area. So you need a solid surface for surface area. So a sponge with more holes in it is gonna, this is gonna sound weird. A sponge with more holes in it is gonna have more solid material than a sponge with less holes in it. And that is because the one with less holes has bigger holes. So more of it's cut out. Whereas a fine sponge has more holes, but they're a lot smaller holes. So between the holes you have the material, so you have more surface area. So a fine sponge has more surface area. So it'll grow more bacteria. So growing more bacteria, assuming they both have the same flow rate, because the sponge, if taken care of and maintained correctly, won't change the flow rate. That'll be on your air pressure and your uplift. Have the same flow rate, the finer sponge will have more surface area and will have the ability to grow more bacteria. So it will do a better job at biological filtration. So the purpose of a sponge filter is to do biological filtration, which the fine sponge does better, and to a lesser extent, mechanical filtration, which the fine sponge does better. So what's the big to-do? What's the big argument for coarse sponges? If we know that the fine sponge does better biological filtration and better mechanical filtration, why are people saying coarse sponges? Why are they arguing coarse sponges? So the argument for coarse sponges is they don't clog up as fast as the fine sponges. True. They don't. Why is it clogging up? Think about it. Why is your fine sponge clogging up? Going back to the analogy of the net, it's because your net's catching stuff. Your water's dirty. The filter is catching stuff out of your water and doing its job. It's clogging up because you're not getting the stuff out of it. You're not cleaning it. So by saying you want to get a net with bigger holes so that you catch less, well, taking the filter out completely will catch less too. You're wanting your filter to do a worse job so that you don't have to clean it. So the filter is clogging up because you're not cleaning it. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's taking and cleaning your water for you. It's catching the filth out of your water into the sponge. If you clean it regularly, it won't clog up like that. I've heard people say, well, I went to the Coarse sponge and I only have to clean my filter every 6 months. I went to the Coarse sponge and I only have to do it every 3 weeks. There's arguments for water changes that way too. Well, I did this and now I only water change once a year. That's not good, people. That's not good. Clean your sponges when they need them. If you got a sponge and it's doing a good job cleaning your water, clean the sponge out. If you keep clean water, if your water is good and clean and filtered, over time, your sponge filter will get less clogged if you're taking care of it. You know, It's like the argument of, well, my oil filter got clogged, so I'm getting a oil filter with bigger holes in it so it don't get clogged as much. Well, okay, if you take your oil filter out, it'll get clogged a whole lot less. Just run it without one. Alright, so the other argument for a coarse sponge is it sinks faster. You put a new coarse sponge in, it'll sink to the bottom. Yeah, there's not much of it there. The water flows right through it. The idea of a fine sponge is the water has to pass past the surface area that has the bacteria on it. Your coarse sponge sinks so fast because it doesn't have the surface area there. If you want something that sinks fast, a rock will sink faster than that coarse sponge will. And you know, I don't have trouble with my fine sponges not sinking because I put them in the water and I squeeze the air out of them. They sink right away. There are some poor designs out there that have other problems, but that's not the fault of the sponge itself. So, and if you have a fine sponge and you need it to sink more than what it's wanting to do, you can always attach a weight to it. So in my opinion, giving up the filtration for the sinking of the sponge isn't a good argument. I've also heard people say, well, when I take my fine sponge out of the tank, it drops gunk everywhere and my coarse one doesn't. Well, I've heard the same argument the other way around, that the coarse one drops gunk out of it more than the fine one does. It's easy to solve that problem too. Both ways, it can drop gunk out of it. Take a plastic bag, put it in the tank, put your sponge in the plastic bag, and take the plastic bag and sponge out. Now you've not dropped any gunk in your tank from either one. Okay, so on the argument of a coarse sponge doesn't do the biological filtration that a fine sponge does. It doesn't hold the bacteria that a fine sponge does. That's proven that it doesn't. More surface area in the fine sponge, so it's going to have the ability to grow more bacteria. One of the leading, well, let's not say leading because I don't know if they're leading, but one of the more popular retailers that's real popular for advertising and selling coarse sponges and talking about how great coarse sponges are, their argument when asked about it, their explanation was basically that in an established tank, there's enough bacteria in your glass and your substrate and your decoration stuff that you don't have to worry about bacteria, whether the filter can hold the bacteria or not. Okay, so let me get this straight. This popular retailer is saying, I'm selling you a filter that's supposed to grow bacteria to filter your water. But because it doesn't do a good job at growing bacteria as the other one, you really don't need it. Your tank will grow bacteria all on its own. So they're telling you that they're selling you a product that you don't really need anyways. I don't like the argument. But what's your thoughts? What do you think about coarse sponges versus fine sponges? Which do you like better? We've shown that fine sponges do a better job both in biological and mechanical filtration, and that the excuses for using a coarse sponge, as I listed, were basically just excuses for not wanting to maintain the sponge and take care of it the way it should be, which may be too much for some people. You might need something simpler than a sponge filter. Maybe there are reasons out there that I don't know, that I haven't been exposed to. Let me know in the comments, and we can continue this discussion in the comments, or maybe in another video. To see the next video, you'll need to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and we'll see you next time.